Listen closely. Rome remembers her not as a wife nor as an empress, but as a whisper that outlived the empire itself. Valeria Messalina, young, radiant, ruthless, played her throne like a lover's game, where silk turned to chains and pleasure became punishment. They said she opened her palace to 25 men in a single night. But behind the fever of desire was a hunger for survival, a woman fighting the gods of Rome with nothing but her body and her will. Tonight, we walk through her forbidden chamber. Rome was never built on reason. It was built on hunger. For land, for gold, for bodies. And in the age of emperors, no hunger burned brighter than hers. Valeria Messalina, young, royal, dangerously alive, learned early that beauty was not a gift. It was a weapon, sharpened by survival. She entered the palace of Emperor Claudius not as a bride, but as a storm. Her smile lit torches. Her silence silenced senators. At night, the marble halls murmured her name. The servants called her Domina, but behind closed doors, they whispered something else. The Empress of Desire. She knew the empire's true language wasn't Latin. It was longing. Every gesture she made, a tilt of the head, a lingering glance, carried power greater than the emperor's decree. Claudius adored her, feared her. Depended on her, he ruled the Senate. She ruled everything else. From her balcony, Messalina watched Rome glitter beneath the moon, a city pretending to be civilized. But she knew the truth. Every Roman heart beat like a beast in a golden cage. Her pleasure gardens were legend. Fountains shaped like gods poured wine instead of water. Mosaic floors glimmered under lamplight, depicting the rise of Venus, goddess of love and chaos. Here senators came not to pray, but to kneel. Messalina walked among them, barefoot on cool marble, her perfume a blend of myrrh and defiance. Each night new stories bloomed. Who she smiled at, who vanished the next day, whose lips she silenced with gold. Rome kept count of her lovers, but not of her victories. It began, they said, as a joke. A drunken boast whispered between two courtesans. Who could satisfy more men before dawn? But when the rumor reached Messalina, she laughed. Not because it was foolish, but because it was a challenge. She summoned her attendants. Silken curtains were drawn. Torches lit the chamber like an altar to forbidden gods. One by one, men of Rome entered. Noble, terrified, willing, doomed. They came seeking pleasure. They left hollowed. Their pride burned to ash. When dawn broke, the city smelled of incense and scandal. Messalina's rivals hissed in secret chambers. An empress should lead by virtue, they said. But what frightened them was not her sin. It was her success, because Rome was ruled by men who worshipped control, and Messalina had taken control of worship itself. In the Senate, they whispered. In the temples, priests prayed for her downfall. But in the streets, women watched her with awe. For once, a woman's sin looked like freedom. Claudius pretended ignorance. Or perhaps he truly didn't care. He loved his empire as a scholar loves a book, blind to the ink running down the page. But even he could feel the change. Messalina no longer bowed when she entered his chambers. She smiled like someone who already owned the crown. She began to replace his advisors with men loyal to her. Gifts flowed, titles shifted, fortunes rose and fell with her whims. Rome's heartbeat slowed to her rhythm. Then came the night of feasting, the night no one would forget. In her palace courtyard, Messalina hosted a banquet where each dish symbolized a sin. Honey for vanity, oysters for lust, wine for betrayal. Musicians played until their fingers bled. Statues of gods looked away. And as torches burned low, Messalina raised a golden cup. To Rome, she said, and to those who dare to live. Her laughter rippled through the hall, low and rich as thunder. For the first time, men feared her more than the emperor, and perhaps that was the point. When the sun rose, the palace was silent. Sheets tangled like battlefields. Wine stains glowed like wounds on the floor. Messalina stood by the balcony again, hair unbound, eyes hollow with triumph. She whispered to herself, as if confessing to the gods, "Power is not given. It is taken, and taken again." The city below stirred awake, but nothing felt the same. The Empress had crossed a line Rome didn't even know existed. And once crossed, there would be no return. The night of laughter had passed, but its echo clung to the marble like perfume. Rome awoke uneasy. Every senator who had once smiled at Messalina now looked at the floor when her name was spoken. They feared her the way sailors fear a calm sea, beautiful but hiding storms. Messalina felt it. Power hums differently once people begin to tremble. She started using that hum like music, calling her dancers not with flutes but with favors. A gift here, a threat there. She discovered that devotion bought with desire lasted longer than loyalty bought with law. Claudius sat at his council, distracted by scrolls and politics, never noticing that his empire had shifted a few inches toward her hand. She replaced a treasurer with a lover, a general with a friend, a priest with a debt. Rome became her instrument, tuned to her breathing. At night she walked the palace corridors barefoot, feeling the chill stone beneath her skin. Each torch she passed whispered to her, "You are more alive than all of them." She believed it. Why wouldn't she? The Emperor slept while she ruled awake. Still, hunger grows. It never thanks you for feeding it. She began to crave something more than obedience. She wanted worship. She wanted to be the goddess behind every closed door. Rumors said she kept a list of men who had pleased her, and a list of men who had disappointed her, and that sometimes the lists traded places. Servants disappeared. Senators reappeared poorer. Gold and blood changed hands without a word. In the city, poets wrote verses they dared not sign. In the baths, noblemen whispered her name like a prayer and a curse. And somewhere, deep within the palace, a woman who once feared nothing began to taste fear herself. Fear of losing what she had stolen. One evening she found Claudius staring at her longer than usual. For the first time he seemed to see her not as wife or queen, but as danger. He asked softly, "What are you becoming?" She smiled. "Something Rome has never seen." He turned away. That was his mistake. Messalina spent the following days weaving alliances tighter than silk. Her rivals plotted. She was faster. They prayed. She acted. Every invitation she sent out was a snare wrapped in flowers. But power built on desire is as fragile as glass. One careless touch and it cracks. She began trusting no one. Even her mirrors were covered for fear they might reflect the truth, that behind the glitter she was lonely. That in her pursuit of control she had lost every human warmth except the one that burns. Late at night she sat beside the fountain of Venus. Its water shimmered with torchlight. Her reflection trembled with it, a crown of ripples circling her head like a halo and a warning. She whispered, "They think they can shame me, but shame is a crown I already wear." Somewhere above, thunder rolled over Rome. Storms were coming again, and Messalina, who had built her empire on hunger, was about to learn that hunger always eats its own. The first crack in her empire came not from enemies but from laughter. A senator joked, half drunk, that the Empress ruled Rome from her bed. By morning, that whisper had turned into a storm. Rumors grew teeth in this city. They fed on envy and lived longer than truth. Messalina heard them all. Each tale twisted her name tighter around the neck of the emperor. And yet she smiled. Because fear was a sweeter perfume than loyalty, Claudius, poor man, pretended calm. But his eyes followed her now. Every time she left a room, he watched the door a little too long, as if afraid it might never open again. Her allies began to vanish. The ones who toasted her yesterday were suddenly ill, traveling, silent. Messalina sensed it, the change in the air, the cold breath of Rome before it bites. Still, she refused to retreat. She believed herself untouchable, as all those who dance too close to power eventually do. She threw another feast, brighter, louder, more defiant than the last. It was her way of saying to Rome, "You cannot shame me. Gold dripped from the walls, flowers hung heavy in the air, musicians played until their strings snapped. Messalina appeared in a gown of crimson silk, the color of victory, and of blood. Guests rose when she entered, not out of respect, but out of fear that sitting would make them her next rumour. She raised her cup, and for a moment the world was hers again. But outside the palace gates, soldiers were already marching. While she laughed, her enemies had gathered, led by one man she thought she could trust. His name was Narcissus, once her confidant, now the Emperor's whisperer. He carried with him a truth sharp enough to kill. Messalina, he said, had taken another man as husband while Claudius was still alive. A secret wedding, a mockery of the throne. Claudius froze. The senators gasped. Rome waited. No one knew if the tale was real, and perhaps it never mattered. In politics, the truth dies the moment it's useful. Claudius called for her arrest. The soldiers went, unwilling, as though chasing a goddess. They found her not in the palace, but in her garden. The same garden where she once ruled desire. She was sitting by the fountain, her hands trembling over the ripples. When she saw the blades of the soldiers' spears, she didn't scream. She only whispered, "So this is how Rome loves?" The captain hesitated. No one wanted to strike first, but behind them, Narcissus spoke softly. The emperor must not see her alive, and so the order was carried out. The night grew still. The fountain that once reflected her beauty turned red. No songs, no prayers, only the echo of her last breath mingling with the sound of water. At dawn, Claudius was told she was gone. He nodded once and asked for breakfast. Rome had lost its most dangerous woman. And yet, in every whisper that followed, Messalina remained alive, a ghost in silk, haunting the empire she once ruled with her touch. Rome pretended to forget. That was how it survived. The morning after Messalina's death, servants scrubbed the palace floors until the marble shone white again. Her portraits were removed, her name carved off the statues. Even her perfume was banished from the halls, as if scent itself could be treason. Claudius spoke little. When courtiers tried to praise his wisdom for ending her reign, he nodded once and stared into the distance. No one dared ask what he saw there. Perhaps her shadow crossing the garden, perhaps nothing at all, but rumors, like ghosts, do not die with their makers. In the taverns, sailors swore they had seen her face reflected in wine. In the temples, women whispered prayers to the goddess who dared. And in the Senate, men spat her name between teeth, still tasting of fear. The city tried to seal her story in silence. Yet every silence left room for another story to grow. Some said she was punished by the gods, others that she had outsmarted death itself. They told of a servant who found her body still warm, of eyes that opened for one last smile, a smile that promised Rome had not seen the last of her. Claudius married again. Politics required it. But his new empress could never erase the phantom of the old one. Sometimes at banquets, when a door creaked or a curtain fluttered, someone would flinch, thinking she had returned to claim her seat. The courtiers spoke of purges. Every ally of Messalina was removed, every friend questioned, every servant replaced. The palace grew quieter, but it was not peace. It was fear wearing a crown. At night, Claudius walked the gardens alone, the same gardens where she once ruled in laughter and sin. He stopped beside the fountain, the water clear again, the air cold and empty. He whispered her name once, so softly even the gods might have missed it. Rome went on. New scandals rose. New rulers fell. But the tale of the empress who defied the emperor never stopped bleeding through the years, because Messalina was not just a woman. She was the mirror of Rome itself, beautiful, corrupt, unafraid. And mirrors, once cracked, never forget what they've shown. Time dulled the edges of her story, but it never erased them. In Rome, names fade like paint in the sun, yet hers still burned beneath the marble. Children of nobles grew up hearing her whispered like a warning, "Do not be like Messalina." But every warning hides a fascination. Each girl who heard her name felt both fear and envy, for the woman who dared to live without permission. Poets called her wicked. Priests called her cursed. But artists, they could not resist her. Statues of nameless women bore her face. Paintings of goddesses carried her eyes. Even centuries later, sculptors carved her mouth as if it still whispered secrets too dangerous to write. Rome's men used her memory to cage other women. She ruined an emperor, they said. She brought down a dynasty. But behind those words was a trembling, a fear that another Messalina might be born again, because her story was never about lust. It was about what happens when desire belongs to a woman, when she chooses instead of being chosen. When her pleasure becomes her power, empires do not forgive that kind of freedom, and yet they could not destroy it either. Messalina's ghost slipped into every lover's chamber, every whispered betrayal, every secret between silk sheets. She became part of the architecture of temptation itself, a spirit that watched smiling through candlelight. As centuries passed, her name became legend, half history, half spell. Some said she was a demon, others, a saint of the forbidden. But maybe she was only human, a mirror Rome didn't want to face. For what is Rome if not a city forever hungry, forever pretending that its sins belong to someone else? In the centuries that followed, her name became a curse the church could not cleanse. Priests spat it from the altar, poets hid it behind metaphors, and yet the crowd still whispered it like an invitation. Messalina. The syllables felt dangerous, sweet like forbidden fruit pressed against the tongue. They built stories around her. Some said she had been reborn as a courtesan in the East. Others swore her ghost haunted every bed where betrayal began. Rome's men found comfort in blaming her for their sins. Rome's women found courage in knowing one of them had once ruled the empire with nothing but her will. As Christianity rose and the empire cracked, her story twisted again. Now she was not a queen but a lesson, the fallen woman, the warning of flesh. Her legend fed sermons for 1,000 years. But even in those pious halls, painters still gave her beauty to the Virgin, and sculptors carved her sorrow into saints, because they couldn't forget her eyes. Those eyes that saw through marble and law, that reminded Rome it was not divine, only human and hungry. Sometimes, late in the ruins of old villas, archaeologists still find her etched in secret murals. A woman reclining on silk, a laurel at her feet, a torch burning beside her. Beneath the paint, an inscription survives. She lived as the gods live and paid the price. Maybe that is her truth. Maybe she was never the monster they painted, only the mirror they couldn't bear to see. Because in every age, in every court, there will always be another Messalina, the woman who dares to want more than the world says she can have. The candles are nearly gone. Only their smoke remains, curling through the dark like memory. Rome sleeps now. The empire that once trembled at her name has turned to dust and olive roots. The fountains where she once bathed are dry, but the air still hums faintly, as if her laughter was carved into the wind itself. You can almost see her, standing on the balcony, silk catching the moonlight, eyes that know too much of life to fear death. They called her wicked. They called her cursed. But perhaps she was only human, a woman who refused to live quietly in a world built for men who sinned loudly. Every empire writes its own villains. Every century buries its truths in marble. But stories like hers, they never stay buried for long. So tonight, if you listen closely, beneath the hum of the city, beneath your own heartbeat, you might still hear it, the whisper of a woman who would not bow. The stones of Rome remember her, and now so do you. Good night, traveler. Rest where her shadow cannot reach you, for even in sleep she walks.